Good morning. Welcome to my channel, Rosa Technocrat. Today we will talk about DOS policy on Fortigate, which is denial of service policy. So this topic came into my mind where recently I've seen a problem where firewall was entering the conserve mode very frequently. So this is how this topic came into my mind, and then how we troubleshooted, how we fixed that problem. So from there, the root cause of the problem was DOS attack. Means the network, my network was attacked by so many external factors, and I was receiving an unexpected traffic on my firewall. So when this unexpected traffic or the traffic burst was being received on my firewall, so firewall was going in out of memory or was using up to the full memory. While troubleshooting or while identifying that issue, I came across applying the DOS policy on the FortiGate. And once I applied the DOS policy on the FortiGate, I could reduce the attack, and my firewall was not going beyond uh, the memory usage, which is for conserve mode. Okay, so this is how I prevented my firewall, my network from a DOS attack, and also prevented my firewall going into the conserve mode. So that is how this topic arose, and that is how I thought about discussing on DOS policy, how to configure, how to optimize, what are the different parameters. Okay, so what we will be talking here today is what is DOS policy, how to configure it, how to optimize, what are the different issues that you can observe while configuring any DOS policy, or based on the logs, attack logs, values, attacks that we see in the FortiGate. So what different things you can observe, you can do, you can configure, you can optimize. So all these things we will be discussing here today. We will also be discussing about all the commands, how you can identify basically. So it's the same thing. And what are the best practices, how you should configure a DOS policy on FortiGate. So we will be talking about all these in our video. We Okay, so let's talk a basic summary of DOS. So as you can see in this network here, the attacker, I consider this as an attacker, and when the attacker sends a burst of traffic to the firewall and then to a destination server, you can say a server might be here, and if he is trying to send a huge burst of traffic or so many requests to the server, causing an denial of service, and which is something like an unexpected traffic. So this is called the DOS policy, or to avoid, how to avoid these kinds of attack. Okay, so let's begin with what is a DOS policy. So a denial of service policy examines network traffic arriving at a FortiGate interface. And for anomalous patterns, what is anomalous pattern? Anomalous pattern is based on threshold. So for everything there is a threshold value that we configured. So if any traffic that crosses that anomalous pattern or that crosses that threshold, which usually indicates an attack. Okay, so these threshold values are something which you need to optimize based on the baseline of your network. Okay, a denial of service occurs when an attacking system starts an abnormally large number of sessions or traffic, okay, with a target system. Who can be the target system? Target system can be a server or network, or application can be a server, network, or application. Okay, so this is a target system. The large number of sessions slows down or disables the target system, preventing legitimate users from using it. Those policies are checked before any firewall policy or security policies, preventing attacks from triggering more resource intensive security protection and slowing down the FortiGate. So this is what DOS policy. I will not go into very basics because I assume here the people, the viewers who are watching this, they are aware about the basics. And you can comment onto the video section for any queries, any questions that you have. I will be happy to explain and answer your queries. So this is something called DOS policy. Okay. And then when, what is the flow? Like how the traffic flows from external network to a within Fortigate and then to outside network. So you assume this is a user, okay, or attacker, anyone. So when a traffic flows to ingress and then egress of the firewall, so the traffic flow is like user sends the traffic, it comes at the network interface level first. So where it comes at the network interface layer. So once it enters what we are talking right now is this is all within the FortiGate firewall. So we can say the packet flow or life of a packet within FortiGate, how it flows. So the traffic first enters into the network interface, goes into the TCP IP stack. So basically it verifies whether it matches all the headers and all. And then the DOS policy is applied. So third is DOS policy, or we can say the first thing that is checked on the firewall with respect to security or to prevent the network is the DOS policy. So DOS policy is the first one. So if we are dropping any traffic at this level at the DOS policy itself, so it does not go through any further checks. It is not checked by any firewall policies, any stateful inspection, destination netting, routing, helpers. So nothing is checked. So this all part is done here. So nothing is checked. So uh, what DOS policy does is it drops the traffic before it is or it will get processed by any other module. So if a traffic is crossing the threshold values, the traffic is dropped at the beginning itself without consuming any resources on the firewall or without wasting any memory on the firewall or saving your network from this attack. So if this DOS traffic or the busted traffic is dropped at this third point, then this is also not passed on to your internal network. So from here, the traffic goes to the kernel, traffic shaping and all, and exits here, which goes into the next hope device. Okay. So this is the flow. And DOS policy drops the bursty traffic or the attacker traffic at the first level itself to avoid denial of service from firewall side, from server side, or from your internal network itself. Let's go. Okay. This we will talk afterwards. I created it prior, sorry. Here what I will be explaining is what are the ways to configure a DOS policy or to optimize it, basically how you should start to configure DOS policy, that we will talk afterwards. Okay, so on Fortigate, if you go under policy and objects, you will see an option called named, not called, I can say named IPv4 DOS policy. So if you select this option and click create new, you will get this IPv4 DOS policy. So what you have to do is you have to give a name for this DOS policy, test, anything, whatever name you want to give, test. The incoming interface, that means you want to apply the DOS policy on which interface. So we discussed, right? So when this is your FortiGate, okay, this is your FortiGate, and if you want to apply an DOS policy coming on this interface, so this is your incoming interface. So when the traffic is coming in, okay, so this is your traffic coming in and traffic going out towards your internal network. Okay, this is internal, and this is external network. Okay, so when we say incoming interface, so we have to stop it at the incoming interface. So I can say this is my incoming interface 1. Okay. So for example, this is port 1. If this is port 1, so then incoming interface will be port 1 here. Source address, what is the source address? Source address can be all, because the traffic can the DOS traffic or the bursty traffic can come from any IP address. So source will be the all. Source will be all. Destination, you have to be specific. So as a best practice, you should never use destination address as all under the DOS policy. Instead, you should use a specific services or a specific server application destination. So you should always use a specific one. That is better. And service also. Recommended to use service as well. Then this DOS policy shows the different anomalies that can be Fortigate can prevent, and Fortigate can check for the threshold values. These anomalies These anomalies are listed down. So you have to set the threshold value for the specific anomaly and then click on OK. So what are the different actions that are available is, one is disable. Disable means this particular anomaly we are not checking, or it's disabled, not enabled. Okay. And when you select logging, that means if this particular anomaly is hitting you, it will generate and log in the event logs. So if you enable logging, that means okay, create and log for this attack whenever it matches. Then disable block is okay, if this particular anomaly is matched and crossing this threshold, then you have to block the traffic or drop the traffic. And the third option is monitor. So if this particular anomaly is matching this threshold or crossing this threshold, it will just monitor and it will say this anomaly is observed but it will not block. So basically this is monitor mode and this is blocking mode. Okay. So same with down, if you go all the bottom, there are different kind of anomalies that are part of this DOS policy. So when the logging is enabled and whenever any attack ID is matched, so these are the different attack IDs that you will see under the Fortigate event logs: 18432, 433, 434. So basically, if any TCP UDP anomaly matches, ICMP matches, and other protocol matches. So these are the different log IDs that will be seen under Fortigate. Okay. Now coming on to the configuration from a CLI perspective or troubleshooting from a CLI perspective. So what we had seen in the previous slide was like while configuring the DOS policy options, we had all these attacks. So when whatever we configure here in the GUI, the same can be seen in the CLI as well. So for that we have to use diag IPS anomaly config command. So if on the CLI, if you type diag IPS anomaly config, so once you type this, you will be able to see these are the different attacks or like a list of attacks that are configurable under the GUI or CLI under the policy. So these number of attacks like SYN flood, port scan, destination session, UDP scan, so they are all listed under here. So you can see TCP SYN flood. So this is the attack name. This is the status, whether it's enabled or disabled. Status is 1. So you see here it's enabled or disabled. Okay. Then log is 1 means that logging is enabled. Action 7 means blocking. Threshold 1 is if this crosses this value. So you can see here this 1 is the threshold, action 7 is the block, logging is enabled, status is this overall this SYN flood is enabled, and this is the attack name. And NAC is quarantine, whether you want to do an quarantine for this. Okay. So this is how you can see it under the CLI as well, diag IPS anomaly config. So once you run this command, you will be able to list out all the attacks or the different anomalies that are configured under the policy. So here it tells you the DOS ID 1 proxy 0. So if you have multiple DOS policies, like 5 DOS policies, so it will show like DOS ID 1, DOS ID 2, DOS ID 3, depending on how many DOS policies you have. Okay. Now there is always a question, like what the most important question while configuring the DOS policy. So whenever we are configuring a DOS policy, the most important or the confusing factor is the threshold. So what should be the threshold for any attack? So thresholds are not a hardened rule or not a hardened parameter that can be same for all the networks. So this threshold value depends on network to network, type of application, and who are the users, how many are the users for that particular application. By default, there are default values on the FortiGate configured. Okay, so based on overall situation, we see these values might be optimal for a medium network, but may not be good for a big network, or maybe, but that depends on the type of traffic that is being received by the organizations. So threshold values should always be optimized based on your network, and they should be changed according to your network. Okay. So when you see the different attacks there, so the easy way, like what does this attack means, for example? So TCP SYN flood, that means whenever a SYN flood is happening, like a attacker is sending continuous SYN packets leading to a denial of service onto a server or onto a FortiGate or onto a application. So that is TCP SYN flood. Same way TCP port scan. Like if an attacker is trying to do a port scan on different IP addresses, different ports to verify what all different services are listening on that particular IP address. So that is called port scan. So here you should understand flood means what? Like it will flood the traffic to one destination. So I have my web server. So he will hit so much SYN request to that, so many SYN request, continuous bulk of millions, billions of SYN requests to a particular destination server, right? So that is called flood. So easy way to remember the how these different anomalies work is, if you see flood, so flood is for single destination. Flood is for single destination. And if you see scan, so scan means who does the scan? Scan will be from a single source. That means one single source sending requests on different ports and different IP addresses within your destination or internal network. So flood is for a single destination and scan is for a single source. This is important to keep in mind. Okay. Flood is for single destination and scan is for single source. So you should accordingly define which attack or which anomalies that you want to configure based on your requirement. So the TCP SYN flood, UDP flood, both are similar. Same way TCP scan, UDP scan, and then TCP source session, TCP destination session. So this is based on the number of sessions, while flood and scan are based on packet per second. So PPS and the anomalies which are session based are based on the sessions once the TCP handshake is done and how many sessions are established. So same way we have ICMP flood, ICMP sweep, and ICMP source session, destination session. So the best way to remember is flood is for single destination, scan is for single source. This you should keep in mind while configuring a DOS policy. Okay, now when we configure a DOS policy or even without a DOS policy, if you go under FortiView sources, or if you can see your all sources that are talking, you can do a manual quarantine as well. But this is in case of you identify this source or this IP is sending a bulk of traffic to my network, and it's creating issues or problem with your network. So in such cases, you can also do a manual quarantine. Manual quarantine means you select this IP address, right click on this, you will see an option ban or quarantine IP address. So you can do a manual quarantine as well. Whenever you do a manual quarantine, you will see that IP listed under the GUI as banned here. And if you run the command diag user banned IP list, then you will see that whatever the IP address that you quarantine or you ban, that is listed here. And if you did a manual quarantine, that will be shown as cause is administrative. That means this IP address is banned administratively or manually. So once we do this, this is manual quarantine. Same way, DOS policy can also do a quarantine based on what is configured. Okay. So let's go back to the DOS policy. So when we configure a DOS policy, the DOS policy can do an action of block and at the same time can also quarantine the attacker. But this quarantine attacker option is not visual in GUI. This can be configured only in CLI. Okay. So action can be, now we can say there can be three actions: action block, action block, quarantine, and monitor. Okay. So whenever the IP address is quarantined because of the DOS policy or by the DOS policy, then this will be listed here again under the banned IP list, but the cause will be a DOS policy. So here the cause that will be mentioned for the IP address will be DOS policy. Okay. Now, let's say you have configured the DOS policy and it's running. You some traffic arrived on your firewall which crossed the threshold value. How you will identify, or from the CLI, how you can check like what was the PPS or why it is blocked. So if you run the command diag IPS anomaly list, it shows the type of scan or anomaly that matched this any particular traffic, what was the IP, and this traffic matched which DOS policy. DOS ID 1 means it matched your single policy that you have configured, and if you have multiple IDs, it may show 1, 2, 3 depending on which policy it is matching. PPS is the current packet per second rate for that particular traffic. But whenever you run this command, this is a current situation. So you have to, if you want to see like what is the current PPS for any traffic that is matching your DOS policies, then you can use DAG IPS anomaly list. So here you see if the attack is like flood. Okay, so these are in packet per second. So you can see this is packet per second. Okay, PPS is packet per second. But wherever the attack is like a session based, so PPS per second is the number of sessions or frequency. Is the number of sessions. Okay, so if you see here frequency for session based anomalies, frequency is the number of sessions. Okay, for packet rate based anomalies, flood and scan, in continuous mode, frequency is the greater of PPS or the number of packets received in the last second. Okay, so basically this frequency is about, in case of session based, this is the number of sessions, and in case of PPS like flood or sweep, this contains the packet for the last second. Okay, so during the time of attack, if we run this command, we can check the PPS value, what is the packet per second during that particular time. It doesn't tells you about the history, it tells the current snapshot. Okay, so this was all about the DOS policy. Now let's go back to the PP page where I left earlier. So, what is the best way to start configuring a DOS policy or how to optimize it? Okay. So, whenever you start configuration of a DOS policy, you should always start in the monitor mode, not in the blocking mode, not in the blocking mode. Okay. So, let's talk from a flow perspective. So, you thought of starting or configuring the DOS policy. Let's start. So what is the first thing that you have to do is create a DOS policy with default threshold, whatever the default threshold exists on the policy. Let's use this, and this will lead to a monitoring period. So once you configure this DOS policy, you should at least monitor that for a period of 1 week and see how many times the DOS log triggered. Does it like any of the time, does it match the policy? Does the log trigger? And if the log did not trigger, that means you have to reduce your threshold values. Means the traffic that is coming onto your network is very less than compared to what is configured in the threshold. So you should optimize the threshold values based on the baseline of your network. So once you monitor for a week, you will come to know whether the DOS log triggered or not. If didn't trigger, that means your traffic is very lower than what is there in the default threshold. So you should reduce it. And after reducing monitoring, you will come to the optimal values that are good for your network. And once those values are good, then you do threshold is set to block normal traffic. So let's say if the DOS log triggered and if you observe like some legitimate traffic got dropped, that means you have to add a additional buffer to the threshold to be safe so that it don't drop your normal traffic. And then you finish it means once all these thresholds are monitored optimized, then you change the action to block. So DOS policy is not directly about starting from the blocking mode. First you should do monitor mode, observe it, optimize the threshold values, and then change the action to block mode. So this is how you should uh, configure the DOS policy. Let's do some labbing if you want, or I think this is all clear. Let me still show you all this in a lab. Let's go labbing. Sorry. Okay, let's log into our firewall. Okay, so we are logged into the firewall. Let's go to the IPv4 DOS policy. So you can see here no DOS policies are configured. Let me configure a DOS policy quickly. Let's say test rosa DOS policy. What will be my incoming interface? For example, port 2, source address all, destination address all for now, and change these block or monitor. For example, I will do all of them monitor for now, logging, all logging. Okay, and click OK. What will be the service? Services all. This is I'm just doing it for testing purpose. And once the policy is configured, let me check if my incoming interface will be port 2 or port 3. This is port 2, port 3, port 2, port 3, policy and objects. I need to check my, okay, into out is port 2, okay. So, okay. Now I need to generate some traffic from a VM, for example. Okay, and I will change the threshold values to very lower values to show you a log. I will just make all of these 1 just for now to show you how it works. Okay, So if I change these packet thresholds to 1 and if I do browse some website, everything will work because my action is into monitor. So if I go to my log and report and I see security events under log and let's say anomaly, what we will see? We will see uh, UDP scan, UDP flood, all these occurred. Why? Because I just set a very lower value of one packet, one PPS per second, right? So just to show you the how the dose is detected. So you can see these are different sources where it action is detected because I had my action set to monitor. And if I go back and change my dose policy action to drop, okay, or block. So if I change them to block, I'm just showing this quickly. Otherwise, we can talk about individually one on one anomaly. So if I do this block and if I try to open, my website may not work. See, now it's not working. Okay. So if I go to my login report again, security events, logs. So what it did, it cleared the session, right? So clear the session means when the action is blocked, it clears the session. Okay, it does not allow the traffic anymore and it clears the session. But during the monitor, it only creates a log saying it is detected. And if the action is blocked, it clears the session between that particular source or depending on the type of attack, if it is source or destination. So then it clears the session. Okay, so this is how you will see event logs under your security events. And if you check the system event logs, maybe you will see an event here, like when we configure the DOS policies. Okay, and security events tells you what was the anomaly and what was the action done for this. And you may see a log where it says repeated so many times. So that is if a single attack is being repeated multiple times within few seconds. For example, I am quickly doing this, quickly doing this. Okay, now if I go back again and if I check the logs, it may show you one of these, like, let me add a description if there is. Message, apply. Okay, so here you see what actually triggered under the message. Anomaly UDP scan triggered. Why? Because the value was 2 and I have a threshold of 1. Okay, so threshold of 1, the 2 crossed this threshold and this repeat 6 times means recently in the last second this has got repeated 6 times, 45 times. So why this is happening? Because I just set a lower value to show you guys how different attacks can be blocked or monitored. So repeated 38 times means because I am doing so quickly and just set a lower threshold value. So you can see different floods scans are there and repeats. This is the because it crossed the threshold. So my threshold was only 1 and they are crossing this threshold. So whenever this happens, it will clear the session and your traffic will not work. So I was not able to browse them. I all okay. So this is all about DOS policies. And yes, I know we can talk a lot on all the commands. And yeah, I can come back again with a second video or based on your queries. Okay, so when I started my this topic, this was based on one of the device was getting into conserve mode. So those attack can be a reason for the conserve mode of the Fortigate also. So at the end, the conclusion for my problem was like high CPU utilization was seen because of high number of sudden connections onto the firewall. And after configuration of these DOS policies, I see like there was no surge of connections and no CPU was going high, no memory was going high. And this avoided the firewall to go into conserve mode. So those attacks can be a reason or bursty traffic can be a reason for your FortiGate to go into conserve mode as well. So let me know any of your queries with respect to uh, dose policy, configuration of dose policies, or any questions that you have with respect to dose policies, just please comment on to my video. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for watching this. Thank you.